Hello and welcome to While You're at the Library. Here we are ready to talk about books and monsters and other things. So, welcome. We're glad you're here. Yes, I'll start off with telling you about monsters. I'm Catherine Poulter, the children's librarian, and in this group today is John Bickelhaupt from Reference.
Hello.
Cathan, who are you?
Why do you ask who I am?
I always like to hear what you have to say.
I'm Cathan Hendricks, the young adult librarian.
Thank you.
Today.
I'm Becky Hadley, the lead circulation librarian.
I am Trent Clegg, and I am a reference specialist.
Very good. All right, well, I need to tell you about the monster, first of all. This little book monster, or actually I think he's a bug. It's very cute. This is going to go on the new display about children's new books. And it will say, catch the reading bug. Well, I have caught the reading bug right here.
Cute.
So here we go. I will put him right here. And then John, why don't you start out and tell us some things about your books.
Well, the first book I'm going to show is a new book. It's called A Magical World, Superstition and Science from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment. And it talks about the interweaving of superstition with kind of the early efforts to be scientific. Like Isaac Newton, for example, was at one point was trying to make gold out of lead, and the origins of a lot of our sciences today are actually in things like that. And so this book discusses that and tells us a lot of things that we perhaps didn't know about the early scientists.
Interesting. Isn't gold really close to lead on the periodic table, and maybe they just thought if they bombarded it with enough?
Well, they're both really heavy,
Yeah.
and they're both really soft.
And they're both metallic.
Yeah, so.
Shiny.
But I don't remember offhand the atomic number of those, so I couldn't, or the weight, so I couldn't tell you.
Okay, with complete accuracy. But you did just tell me some things about them.
Oh, well, I did, yeah, but where they are on the table, I don't know. So in relation to each other.
Yes.
So.
Cool.
Okay. So yeah.
It's a magical world. Nice. Cathan.
Okay. I've been having way too much fun reading award-winning books and finalists and things like that the American Library Association, they call them the American Library Association Media Awards, and they release those every January. And so I've been challenging myself not only for our 50/50 book quest, but also there's another one with young adult. It's something called The Hub, and they review young adult books. And so they had a challenge for 4 months. You're supposed to try to read 24 books. I don't know if I'll make it through all those, because they gave me specific books to read, in each of different categories, especially the awards or reluctant readers' picks and things like that. So the last one I finished ties in with another one I finished the other day. And this one is called Dear Martin, and it's by Nick Stone. And she has written several other books that I didn't actually look up and write down what she'd read. But this is a timely story about a boy named Justice McAllister who is going to a prep school. He is black. He is one of the few black people in this school. And his mother is raising him by herself. And so he's coming from a more lesser economic background than many of his classmates. One of his good friends is named Manny, and he's from a very wealthy family, but he's also black. And it's really interesting because in the area that Justice is from, there are a lot of kids that are involved in gangs, and they see the world a whole lot differently than he is. He's an honor student. He's ready to head to Yale. He's the captain of his debate team, and something happens to him early on in the story where he has a girlfriend that he's been on again, off again with. She has a mother that's Scandinavian and a father that's black, so she's pale, lighter skinned. And he goes to rescue her. You know, they're in the off part of their relationship, but he finds out she's been drinking and she's going to drive home, and he doesn't want her to hurt herself. So he walks there to her to help her. And she's not agreeing with him, but he finally gets her in the back seat of her car, and then the police come. And they immediately handcuff him because they think he's attacking her. And they are assuming that she's white and that he is a hoodlum because he has a hoodie on when he comes up. They won't let him talk. They just immediately treat him as if he's a criminal or he's a member of a gang. Finally, he does get released and no charges are pressed. But it really makes him think. He's been trying to follow the teachings of Martin Luther King, which is why the book's called Dear Martin. He's been writing a journal. And he's sort of having this conversation with Martin Luther King about what would you do in this situation, and this is what's happened to me lately. Well, up until this point, he has never really thought about being different, but it's kind of come home to him that, wow, because of my skin color, I have been treated differently. And his friend Manny, because he's from a wealthier background, has friends that are, a group of friends that are white, and they make racial jokes all the time, and Manny kind of puts up with it, and now Justice is looking at it going, wait a minute, why are you doing this? Why are you allowing them to talk to you like this? They have a discussion in one of their classes, their debate class, about racial inequality, and the white boys in the class just assume that there isn't any inequality, where everybody's equal, we treat everybody the same. And Justice's speech partner, or debate partner, is white, a girl, and she brings up some really good arguments about it. I was just really intrigued by it. It has some sad stuff in it, but one of the things that happens is they go to this costume party, a Halloween party, and they all decide to dress up in different stereotypes, which Justice isn't real thrilled about, but he does. His character happens to be a thug, which is totally opposite of what he's like in real life. And Manny is supposed to be the token black guy, and Jared is the yuppie politician, and there's a surfer dude and a redneck, and one boy decides to dress as a KKK, the Klansman. This ends up causing them trouble, that night. But it also brings home, how Justice is feeling about the fact that he got put in handcuffs for, several hours, and how he was racially profiled. And his partner gives a really interesting talk about the differences in the way people are raised and how they might be perceived, or how they might even perceive themselves in the world, and how a lot of people will say, well, this boy Jared says, well, you only got into Yale because, you probably didn't get very good grades. You're just probably more of a token black person in the school. And he actually scored higher than Jared had. But now he's always going to wonder, are people going to look at me like that and think that, I didn't deserve to be here? And his friend SJ, this girl, brings up the fact that, here's us in this prep school. Most of us have money to go here. We've got the best of the books and the equipment and the best opportunities. And then here's a student that's going to a poor school in the inner city, and he doesn't have these. He's got books that are 15 years old, computers that aren't working, various reasons that maybe they can't always make it to class, and yet they're smart. And what's wrong with giving them a chance to go to a good school? At any rate, goes on and on about that. Something else happens in the story to his friend Manny, which is very sad. But I really, really liked this, and tying that in with this book, which won the Robert F. Siebert Medal. This is an informational nonfiction book, obviously. This is about the 12 days in May. And this is the Freedom Ride in 1961. And it gives you the introduction in here about when the different challenges were presented to the Supreme Court, where they started out with saying that you cannot have, you can't discriminate, so we can have separate but equal facilities are acceptable. That was in 1896, the Plessy versus Ferguson. And then by 1946, Morgan versus Commonwealth of Virginia, they said the states of one law cannot extend beyond its border, so you can't have segregation on interstate travel, because people on buses sometimes were discriminated as they went into another state. Then they had the Brown v. Board, which we're probably more aware of, 1954, where they said you can't segregate in a school situation in the place of field of public education. And then they extended that in 1960, the Boynton versus Virginia, where they ruled this racial segregation in interstate transportation was unconstitutional, such as at lunch counters, waiting rooms at bus stations, and restrooms. And then they went on this Freedom Ride to test that, because it wasn't equal. Even though by law things were equal, when you got further south, things were not equal. They still went by their culture, what they believed in. So they didn't believe in, here's these two children, a famous picture of two white children who are saying, we don't want to be integrated. Well, they're only going by what their parents are saying, so they know no other reason. In each of these towns that this bus would stop, these 12 riders or 13 riders, they would go to the lunch counter that said coloreds only or whites only, and try to test the boundaries. And when they got further south they went, the more trouble they had. At one point, very sadly, they had their bus set afire. And I mean, here's what their welcome is into Alabama. The Realm National Alabama of the Klan. And that's how, they wanted to make sure everybody was quite aware of that.
Okay, so you've talked about a little bit of history. I'm going to jump to a different part of history, and that's World War II. So this book is The War That Saved My Life by Kimberly Burbaker Bradley. This is about Ada, a 10-year-old girl who lived in London, and her little brother Jamie. And if you remember right, during World War II, the children of London were taken to the country. And the thing about Ada is she has a twisted foot, or a club foot. And her mother has always just kept her locked in the apartment, has never let her out because something was wrong with her. And so Ada has taught herself how to walk when Mom and Jamie are not home. And she takes it upon herself to get to that bus so that she can be evacuated to the country. And that is how this war saves her life, is because getting to the country, she's treated like a normal child. Susan Smith is the woman that takes these children in, and she has this wonderful horse that's on the cover here named Butter, and Ada has always dreamed about riding horses, and Butter really brings out the best of her. And this book is a lot about love. I really have to say, the love that develops between the children and Susan, and along with other people in the town. Loved this book a lot. It's won a lot of different awards, and I was really excited when I found out that it had a sequel, The War I Finally Won. And this book, I have to warn you, you have to have a box of tissues to read this. It starts out with her getting a surgery to fix her clubfoot, and it just gets better from there. There's, of course, bombings that are happening, deaths that occur. But once again, the main point that runs through the whole story is the bond of love between people. And I just think it carries a really good message. So once again, that's The War I Finally Won, and this is a brand new book in the children's fiction section. If you're wanting to do the 50-50 book challenge, book quest, The War That Saved My Life and The War I Finally Won, they both have a horse on the front, so that could count as an animal on the cover. It has military in it, so that's one of the other categories. An award winner. and a book off of a display, because they were both on displays this past month. So that's just a
History.
few of the
A whole bunch of
history
them.
book.
Mhm.
I mean, so many categories that these books could fit under to fill up your 50 books that you're going to read this year. So I recommend both of these very highly.
Cool.
Great, thank you, Becky. Trent.
Well, I've got a couple of books. They don't necessarily deal with history. They deal more with culture. Although what is history and culture without each other?
Right.
The first book is by Hindal Sengupta. It's called Being Hindu. You know, living here in Southeast Idaho, we don't really have a lot of exposure to
There's some.
Hindu religion. I personally have had very little, if anything, to do with someone who is Hindu and speaks about their religion. And so this is basically kind of a primer on what it means to be a Hindu and what they believe. And it also talks about, you know, how Hindus see themselves in society. They kind of view themselves as Switzerland on the outside of the conflict between Islam and Christianity. They talk about how this could provide a path to plurality for our societies so that we could all live together. It looks like a fascinating book. I've sampled a little bit of it here and there. Not a very thick book. So, you know, a little bit of culture that we don't normally get here in Southeast Idaho. And it has a gorgeous cover. So there's Being Hindu. And then also, I have The Immigrant Cookbook.
Cool.
No, this is not a book on how to cook immigrants. This is this is a book that is contributed to by many people
Cool.
from all places in the world, but they have become Americans. They have become naturalized American citizens. And they each contributed a recipe or two, and it talks a little bit about where they're from and, you know, their story about how they became an American. And then, of course, there's the recipe, and it talks about how this recipe fits into their culture from where they came. And it's a fascinating, beautiful book with all kinds of different.
Ooh,
different-
beautiful pictures.
Oh, I know,
It's
it's-
making me hungry.
They all have pictures?
They all have pictures. Every recipe has a picture.
Wow.
Every recipe has a picture and a person and a story behind it.
Becky, that's
And
your
it
next book.
reflects how diverse our nation actually always has been in the collection of peoples that have been here. And so it's not only a delicious book, but it's a book to make you think. You know, we're not as isolated as we might think here in this valley, in this area. So a couple of things to check out of the library.
Oh,
That's good.
that is really good. Thank you for that. Now, I have something to talk about. A very kind donor gave a donation to the library for us to use in a children's program. Well, I've wanted to do something like this for a long time, and that is, I think that one of the most important things that we can do is to have books available for children. That's why we're a library. But I also think that children should have books in their home that are theirs to keep forever. And I realized that about 4th grade is when the reading bug can really hit. Kids can be a fluent reader at that time. Children can be fluent readers. They also have a variety of interests, and so I thought 4th grade is a good grade to target. So with this donation, we were able to buy enough books to give to 2 of the area elementary schools. I would love to expand this and cover every elementary school, public and private, because every child needs books. But at least this is a beginning. So we've chosen 4 books that will go and talk about these books and talk them up really well so that every child will want to read every single book. And then they'll get to choose from these 4 books and take one home and keep it forever. And I'm hoping that after they read it, they'll pass it on to their friends and they'll get to read the one that their friend has chosen. And pretty soon, each child will have been able to read all 4 books. So these are the books. Tales of a 4th Grade Nothing by Judy Blume, which is a story of Peter and his precocious little brother and a turtle and Oh, all sorts of things. Television commercial, a mischievous boy, all sorts of things. So this is one of the books. The second is The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin. This won a Newbery Award back in, I think it was 79. Let me see. I can't remember for sure.
I think it was
Seven-
earlier? Was
Yeah, it was copyright 78, so it won the 79
Okay.
I like that book.
Newbery Medal. This is a story about a mystery and an old haunted house and a fortune and some people who are brought together not by chance to solve this mystery and have justice come about. And oh, it's a good story, and people's lives intermingle and are interwoven, and people gain self-confidence and make friendships, and eventually the mystery gets solved and the fortune becomes one of theirs. It's a good story. The Westing Game. The third book is The Whipping Boy. So this is a fictional story, and back in the olden days, princes, royalty, could not be spanked. That would be treason. And so if a prince was naughty, as Prince Brat is, then poor Jemmy from the streets, who's the whipping boy, gets his thrashing instead. And Jemmy doesn't like this, but Prince Brat is not a very nice child. He is mischievous, and poor Jemmy gets a lot of spankings. But one thing is that Prince Brat does not want to learn how to read. There's no reason to learn how to read or write or do sums. But Jemmy from the streets sees this great opportunity, and so he learns how to read and write and do his sums, and he really becomes quite educated. Well, when Prince Brat wants to escape the castle and orders Jemmy to follow him, they fall into some ruffians' hands. And that's where the book gets really exciting. So this is the third book that the fourth graders can choose, The Whipping Boy. And the fourth book is the Newbery Award winner for last year. It's called The Girl Who Drank the Moon. And it's probably the longest book, but it's a beautiful story about magic and a little baby who became magic herself, and a little tiny dragon, and a swamp monster, and oh, it's a good story, and a witch who is kind and a witch who is wicked. And oh, this is a great adventure. So I am sure that all of the children who get an opportunity to choose one of these books will make a good choice, because there's not really a bad choice to be had, but I'm looking forward to this. And I would really like to be able to continue this and expand it in years to come to include more than just 2 schools, but maybe all 18. That would be really wonderful. So that's something that's happening at the library in the month of April. John, what else do you have for us?
Well, it's time to geek out. This is a book I ordered recently on the Google Chromebook, and I thought it was an appropriate thing to get because Google Chromebooks are computers they're what are called thin clients. So they don't have much in the way of an operating system. They don't have a lot of storage on the computer. They do most of their stuff on the internet.
On the cloud.
In the cloud, yeah. And the original Google Chromebooks were based on a browser. They were based on the Chrome browser. The newer ones have a little more going on. There's a Linux kernel that sits at the, actually operates on the computer. But the reason I think these are likely to become fairly big is because the computers are less expensive than other laptops. They're lighter weight. so they're easier to carry around. And you don't have to make a huge investment in a lot of software because all the software is already in the cloud. So I think people are going to start seeing these as a cheap alternative to the laptops and the things that people are so used to using now. Also, the Android operating system is what's used on tablets, and they use some elements of Android in the operating system on this. But where this is better than tablets is that there are actually ports on the computers. There's some USB, at least 2 USB ports on any Chromebook, and some of them have more than that. And then they also have HDMI hookups so that you can connect a Chromebook to a TV set. And so there's, they can do probably 95% of what people use computers for. In fact, some people don't use them for anything else. There's some people who can do everything they need to do on a computer with these. And so I think we're going to start seeing people purchasing them, and I thought we should have something in the collection that would give them some idea of how to make use of it. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, another award, actually finalist. So there are several books that have won the Excellence in Young Adult Nonfiction Award. This one's actually a finalist, so it wasn't the one that won the award. But I waited quite a long time to get this book. It's called #NotYourPrincess, Voices of Native American Women. And it is edited by Lisa Charlieboy and Mary Beth Leatherdale. And this one could go easily for poetry if you were doing the 50-50 challenge, quest. What I really liked the most about it were the illustrations. Oh my gosh, they're so beautiful in here. So this is a collection of poetry, art, essays, I think that's it, of various indigenous women. They're sharing their feelings about stereotypes and racism towards Native Americans. I can't remember what this person is. It says Freedom in the Fog. Anyway, it tells what tribe or nation that they're from. A lot of them are Canadian. Let's see, this one has. They talk a lot about how they've been abused and all this, like I said, the stereotypes. This one has a graphic that they've told a story. But just gorgeous 2 braids. And it wasn't easy to read everything. But it's just had such a good variety of things in it that I thought it was really women that are very, talented and educated. So this would be a good book for nonfiction, be a good book for poetry, maybe a book that would challenge you. So this was one that I read through and enjoyed. And
can I read it now?
And you may read it now.
Thank you.
Catherine wants it next. And I have a couple others, but I can wait until we've talked about some more books.
Great. So I've been reading some of the Aunt Dimity books. I think I've talked about a few of them on here. So Aunt Dimity is a ghost who communicates with her friend Youre through a special journal. And I thought to myself, how did this all start? So I figured out which book was number 1. The series is now labeled. So this is book 1, and this is a well-used paperback copy, and it's called Aunt Dimitys Death. And in this book, Youre is going through a hard time in her life, and she gets a special letter in the mail from a lawyer company or firm, a lawyer firm. It says, Aunt Dimity or Miss Dimity has died.
Naturally. And you've taken a while to track down, but we need to let you know what her final wishes are. Well, growing up, her mother told her what we call Aunt Dimity stories. And they were just about this silly old lady and how she would go through different trials in her life. And so she always thought
Dimity was a made-up person. So she's like, well, this is really weird that this law firm would send me this letter. So she went to decide, what is this all about? And she got there, and she finds out that Dimity is a real person, lives in England, and she has asked Youre in the will to travel back, stay in her cottage for a month, and write the introduction to the book of all the Aunt Dimity stories. Because Aunt Dimity stories were written by Dimity to Yore's mother to share with her as she grew up. Because her mother and Dimity were best friends during World War II. And so she decides, why not? And there's a little bit of money involved, so as she goes to England, anything that's spent is covered. And so she's like, what is there to lose? So she goes and she stays in the cottage, and the cottage is haunted.
By Aunt Dimity?
By Aunt Dimity. She helps her make the best cookies that she has ever made, and guess what? The recipe is in the back of the book.
Of course.
Right here, oatmeal cookies. It's in the back here. But she also helps her along the way discover some things about her mother and her father, how they met, that kind of thing. And a relationship bonds with them, and she does discover the special journal that they can communicate with each other. Because Aunt Dimity doesn't like speak out. Everything comes out in the writing of the journal. And at the end of it, you think Aunt Dimity is finally rested, but we know now that book 22 has come out, there's more to it. And it was just a really great beginning of this series, and I was excited that we had book 1. And so if you would like to know how these wonderful Aunt Dimity books started, these are in the paperback section under Atherton. Or if you'd like to start in the middle like I did, that's fine too. So you really don't have to read them in an order, because the beginning kind of tells you how things are to be. And you do see Yore's life change from when she first meets Aunt Dimity, gets married, has children, that kind of thing, and how she lives in England. So that was a fun one.
Nice.
Cool.
Thank you.
That's unique. I like that. I have a book called Iris Grace. This is how Thula the cat saved a little girl and her family. Now, Iris Grace was a little girl with autism, and one day her mom picked up a Maine Coon cat, and they named her Thula after Iris Grace's favorite lullaby. It's a Zulu word meaning peace. And normally cats are not thought of as therapy animals. They're not thought of as service animals. But this cat always knew when Iris Grace was being overstimulated, when she was building up to a meltdown, and knew exactly what to do to help her. And so this cat, because when a family's dealing with autism, that can often be very stressful on a family. And this cat basically, the author says that this cat saved their family. And Iris Grace, one thing that makes Iris Grace special, not only does she have a marvelous cat, but she is also an amazing impressionistic painter.
Wow.
From the age of 3, this little girl would communicate in visual images.
Wow.
That was her only method of communication. It was only after Thula came along that she began to talk. But this story is about a special little girl and the cat that helped her reach out into the world in verbal ways, and how that all saved her family. But aren't those just gorgeous images?
Those are beautiful.
She has wonderful, wonderful use of color. And mind you, this is a child. This is not Monet. And there's a picture of her.
Nice.
Yeah.
And how old is she now?
I think she's like 9 or 10 now. She might be a little bit older than that.
And does Thula still live?
I think so.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Also, while I have the floor, is a book called Soonish. This is completely, totally different from the
It's
Iris
like a
Grace book. But this is 10 emerging technologies that'll improve and or ruin everything. But the fun thing about this book, this book talks about things like 3D printing new organs for people, and how that's something that's coming up. Asteroid mining is another subject. Fusion power, it powers the sun, and that's nice, but can it run my toaster? You know, things like that are the subject. Even there was one that talked about basically being able to make molecules do anything you want. Programmable matter. What if all your stuff could be any of your stuff? But the thing that makes this book unique is it's told through a lot of graphic novel type imagery. Yes, there's a lot of text, but interspersed throughout the text, you also have graphic novel type imagery. And so the tone of this book, while it deals with a lot of scientific subjects, it's very lighthearted and boils it down into language that most of us can understand. So Soonish, this technology will be available soonish, but this book is available now, so come get it.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you. Does it talk about rocket packs?
I don't think it
I
mentions
always
rocket
thought
packs.
that jet packs would be here by now.
Did they talk about elevators to outer space?
Well, the cover would make you think that it does, but it just talks about, why haven't we got a colony on the moon yet? So
Okay.
Just talk about self-driving cars.
we already have those.
Yes.
Well, John, tell us about something else that will intrigue us.
Okay.
Oh,
Something, just something.
Structure and interpretation of computer programs.
Okay.
This is a heartwarming story of geeks, computer geeks who
connect.
fall in love, who connect. Yes, and it's you will be able to like shudder with anticipation at their the course of their relationship with one another. And
You talked about the love languages.
yes, you can gasp in amazement at the secret code that is formed by the words that are used with computers. The love code of words like ROM and RAM and hard drive and bandwidth, and you can find out all about those. So this is a wonderful book, and
The romance.
happy April Fool's Day.
I was going to say,
Very
and,
good.
and really light reading, right?
Yes, very light reading. So here's a picture. So,
Looks like a circuit diagram.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like a graphic novel to me.
yeah. So, anyways, what this book actually is, and it'll probably sound just as strange, is it's an introduction to programming, and it's done using a computer language called Scheme. And some of the other books that deal with Scheme are books like The Little Schemer, and The Seasoned Schemer, and The Reasoned Schemer. But the Scheme programming language is derived from an earlier programming language called Lisp, which is short for list processing. And list processing is used a lot for artificial intelligence. That's its main reason for being. It's not a language that sees much use out in the rest of the world. But the advantage of learning about programming from this language is that the syntax is simple enough that it doesn't really get in the way of learning the concepts of programming. And so what you learn about programming in this book, you can then take and apply to using any language. And this book is considered a classic. It's been around for, well, the most recent edition was published in 1996, and it's used at MIT as a textbook.
Now, I think that you were telling me that this is available for free online. Is that right?
That's true. You can also find copies of it to download free and legally online. So they have it in PDF format, and you can download it from MIT and some other places. So
Cool.
But here's a hard copy, and so if somebody doesn't have internet, they can certainly use this book to
Or doesn't
to
like to
find
read
out about
online. Okay.
Yeah,
Or really likes
Nice.
the smell of paper like I do.
yeah, and some people learn better from
Flipping back and forth.
having a real solid,
Flipping.
honest book in their hand. So there's Lambda. That's Lambda.
Yes, Lambda.
See, Lambda. Yeah.
Okay.
Delta.
One of the things they said in
Hi.
the book that I liked is that I sort of appreciated is that programming is like having a magic. You know, it's kind of like using
A spell.
spells. You know, it's like having a computer do what you want by
Yeah.
I think it's
by
Greek.
feeding
I
it
think it's Greek.
just by feeding it a certain spell. And
Latin.
that really is
I can speak any language but Greek.
that really is how it feels when you write a program and,
Yeah.
and it works.
Yeah, like, oh, you've done something.
like it's
It would-
magic.
It
yeah.
would be
Kinda
magic
cool.
if I could do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Good.
there it is.
Thank
that
you.
book.
That is astounding.
Well, I'm going to bring up a book I talked about once before because I thought it had some interest. I hadn't quite finished it the first time, and then I
Right.
got into it. But I wanted to point out just a couple of things about it. This was about the person named Sasha, who was set on fire on the bus in Oakland. And this is a true story, and how it came about. And the thing that I found fascinating about this is, as I read, I had skimmed through and found out kind of how it ended. But the thing I found most fascinating was the way it portrayed both parties in this. Richard, the boy who caused the fire, and Sasha, the person who was set on fire, because it really made these people real. Richard wasn't a bad person. He didn't really intend to harm somebody. It was part of a little prank. He kind of got egged on by some other kids. He took full ownership for what he did, and it tells, you know, what his life was like prior to that and what his life was like after that, and how he did, you know, completely accept responsibility for what he did, and how Sasha and their family forgave him for that and went on from there. Sasha was, and I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly. Sasha was born male and not really transgendered, but there's a whole list of gender, sex, sexuality, romance terms in here that I thought were really interesting, and everything from agender to androgynous, bigender, intersex, and on and on. If you're interested, this is really fascinating to me. I didn't realize there were that many terms, but just how people identify and how they act on how they identify. But Sasha was wearing a skirt that day. Sasha liked wearing skirts. Sasha and the boys that were with Richard were, you know, kind of, you know, what's that person doing? And Sasha was asleep at the time when this happened on the bus, and you know, got severely burned on their legs. But you know what they did with it after that, they didn't. Sasha's family and Sasha did not want to see him punished, you know, and put away in prison forever. He wasn't even you know, an adult yet. But at that time, they were charging juveniles as adults for certain crimes, and I thought it was really interesting to find out later that the laws had changed in California. 10 years prior, they would incarcerate juveniles. They had 10,000 juveniles incarcerated in 11 state facilities and 6 camps. Today, that number hovers around 700. And they changed the way that they dealt with juveniles, and they found it was far more effective. You know, at that point, what they were doing was just saying, okay, you did a crime, there's been an increase in violent crimes, so you did a crime that's like an adult crime, so you should be charged as an adult, without really understanding the development of youth, their brains and their emotions and what they're going through. And so they found, in changing how they approached it, that there are far fewer kids in juvenile detention now. So I thought that was really interesting. this person has really done a lot of research on it. So I wanted to bring that one up again. It was a Stonewall Book Award, as well as Excellence in Young Adult Nonfiction finalist.
Great.
So it really humanizes both of the characters in this, I mean, the main people in this story. So I think it's really, really worth reading.
Thank you.
So.
Okay, something much lighthearted. I
Sorry.
needed something humorous to read, and so I came across this one. It's called The Emperor's Ostrich by Julie Berry. Now, I've read some other books by Julie Berry, and she's a fun author. So this book is a very unlikely, funny adventure. So it starts out with Begonia, and she has a cow that she's responsible for. And this cow likes to wander away. And it usually takes all day. Go get this cow, bring her back. And so she sets off to find the cow, and along the way she meets interesting people. First, she comes across the lady who makes the mustard, and she's given a container of magical mustard. Then she comes across a man in the market who wants to give her a bell, so the next time she loses her cow, she's easier to find. So she has a bell, and she ends up with a scarf and a hairpin, and I mean, just all these funny gifts along the way. And she just keeps going, and this cow just keeps getting farther and farther away as she's headed, and she ends up with a magical map that shows where she's at, and it kind of moves along with her. Meanwhile, in another part of the kingdom, the emperor is about to come of age that he's going to become fully in charge of the kingdom, not just the chancellor. And he needs to wise up a little. And so the ancestors, magical spirits, scare him and make it so he cannot say his name, and he cannot say the word emperor. And as they scare him, he gets on this ostrich and runs away. But he's trying to get on his way back to the castle. Now, he's used to being very spoiled and getting his way about everything.
Did he have a whipping boy?
No, I don't believe he did. However, he had a servant for everything. He had a servant to bring him his milk. He had a servant to bring him his water. He had a servant to bring him cake. Wanted to bring cookies. I mean, somebody for everything. Well, he comes across Begonia and her little friend named Key. And he can't say his name, so he says his name is Lumi, which is the nickname his mother had given him. And the three of them are starting on this adventure to get to the castle, because that's the way they've heard the cow has gone. Well, the strange thing is the cow and the ostrich fall in love.
Oh.
So she can't just turn around and go home. They have to continue on to the castle. Meanwhile, the evil chancellor is trying to overtake the whole kingdom and frame that the emperor has been murdered. So we've got to get him into the right place, make the ancestors happy with the things he has learned along the adventure, and get the cow back to the farm where she really belongs. So, fun adventure, lots of fun characters to meet, and they each play a part in helping the emperor get to his proper place and learning the lessons he needs to learn in order to be able to govern his kingdom.
Very
so
nice.
That's The Emperor's Ostrich by Julie Berry.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Briefly, I have this lovely book called Ink and Paint, The Women of Walt Disney's Animation. So a lot of people who aren't Disney files don't know this, but in the early days of the Disney Studios, when he was making his animated cartoons, there weren't a lot of women involved in that industry. But as he became more successful and his creations and his studio expanded, they started making cartoons in Technicolor, and they needed they needed people to color in the drawings of the animators, and it seemed like this was that women were very, very good at this, and so they hired a lot of women to do this. And this book basically chronicles the history of the women of the ink and paint department in the Walt Disney Studios in the golden era of their studios. And it's lavishly illustrated with photographs and artwork. When they were animating Snow White, which was Disney's first studio, they couldn't figure out why she looked so flat. And her face just looked so flat. And so one of the women in the ink and paint department put a little rouge on her, and Disney said, "Well, that's great. She looks a lot better, but there's no way that you can do that like the same way for the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cells that you have to do." And she says, "Walt, what do you think we do every day?" And so that's why Snow White has blush on her cheeks throughout that whole film, is because the ladies knew exactly how to apply the rouge to her cheeks in the drawings. And then it goes on to tell about the role that they played in the Disney studio through the 1940s and 50s. But anyway, it's a lovely book, lavishly illustrated. Come in and take a look, take it home, and bring it back.
Very good. Which was what we want people to do with all of the books.
We would hope that they would
all
bring
of
them
the
back.
books.
Yes.
Yes.
Eventually.
Good. Thank you for that. John, how about another
Well,
book in the time that we have left?
okay, let me see what I've got here. Well, speaking of animation, time to geek out a little more. This is a book called SVG Essentials. And SVG is scalable vector graphics.
Okay.
Okay. And
Is that what you use?
that's
When you
one of the things.
One of the things, okay.
Okay, so the scalable, if you used Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, that uses vector graphics. Photoshop uses what's called raster graphics.
Okay.
And the difference between them is that vector graphics is scalable. So you can create something using vector graphics and enlarge it or shrink it
Without losing
any information at all, because it's all based on mathematics. Whereas in Photoshop, the raster graphics, that's based on pixels, and so if you reduce the size of an image,
You
you
lose stuff.
information, and if you try to enlarge it again, it's not going to look as good as it originally did. So these are vector graphics are starting to be used a lot in animations on the web, and so there's this is a standard that was developed at the World Wide Web Consortium in the early part of the 2000s, and originally all of the standards that were being developed were proprietary standards that belonged to the companies that produced them. And this provides people a way of communicating between different standards, of transforming
without
things.
the proprietary stuff.
So transforming things from one standard to another, and this is like the pathway to do that. And so people are getting more interested in this, and it's kind of like my interest in it is it kind of sits at the interface between computers and art. And people can do art using these things, this language. You can embed SVG in HTML. HTML is the language of the internet, the web. And you can animate SVG using JavaScript. And then you can also use it with other programming languages and things too. So I'm excited about this, and
Very versatile.
I thought this should be one of the books that we had for people to use in the library for that reason. So
Very good. Well, thank you.
you're welcome.
Can you talk in 2 minutes?
2 minutes. Let's see, I have one more book I can talk about. This is a Schneider Family Book Award for the ages of about 11 to 13. This is a book that best depicts the disability experience for that age group. And this is about a girl named Julia, who is deaf. She's been going to a school for deaf, but she has a bad habit of, well, she expresses herself with graffiti. And so one day, one of her friends a slur has written on the wall about her, and so she does graffiti over it. She ends up getting expelled from school and is sent to mainstream on a public school. So while she's there, she does have an interpreter that goes around with her, but she has this habit of wanting to tag around the community, and this is something that she did. So here is one of her tags, but somebody starts to challenge her.
Ooh.
And she doesn't
And
know who it
change it.
is, and add to her and make it really interesting, but she feels, a little bit threatened about it. And it's about her opening up and allowing, see, the person that's tagging says, your move.
Oh.
Is tagging, she finds a way to open up about who she is and why she feels so picked on and persecuted, which she's not. She just kind of has a chip on her shoulder. But it's really, I learned a lot about graffiti and people that are graffiti artists, and whether it's graffiti or if it's street art. She has a teacher that's fighting for allowing street art to remain in the community. And I just thought it was a really interesting book about things that I didn't really have much of an understanding for. So
Great. Thank
I
you.
would recommend Your Welcome Universe by Whitney Gardner.
Wonderful. Come to the library, check out these books, take it home, and bring them back. Goodbye.